Hello, friends. I've been thinking about something that I learned in a leadership seminar, or maybe it was a conference. I'm not really exactly sure the difference between a conference and a seminar. I went to it. It was shortly before the pandemic situation kicked in. I remember that distinctly because I remember coming home I was in the Vegas airport waiting to fly home, and I remember the hysteria was just starting to really build, and it was in the air, but people weren't yet wearing masks or anything like that. But anyway, that'll probably always be the emotional marker for how I mark that time. But something that I learned in that conference overlaps with some bigger questions that I've had regarding questions specifically raised by David McGowan in the book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, but also general ideas of social engineering, psychological operations, how this stuff would actually work. I've read quite a bit about how these tactics are used in other countries, are used by countries against other countries, including the U.S., in order to kind of reshape and redirect a country, a culture. And I've always been curious, how would one actually go about that, right? That seems like really difficult. And specifically when talking about McGowan, who passed away a couple of years ago, and I hope is doing well wherever he is, because he always struck me in interviews with him, he just strikes me as a very good guy. And I hope he's doing well wherever he is. And when I say wherever he is, I mean because I'm not certain I understand what happens after we die. I'm not. Wherever he is, if there's a good place and a bad place, he's in the good place. I wasn't trying to imply that he might be in the bad place. But anyway, so McGowan's basic thesis, what McGowan found, well, here's the facts of what McGowan found. And not since McGowan, other people have found. There's a book called the Tavistock Institute I can't remember the title. I plan on discussing that later. But that book also presents this evidence that there is this very strange overlap between intelligence agencies and the 60s counterculture. What McGowan found, what he kind of honed in on, was specifically that a lot of the major figures from the 60s scene, the Laurel Canyon scene from which the whole hippie music thing came out of, a lot of them came from prominent military families, not just families where they had a dad who served at some point. These were high-ranking officials, and beyond that, there's always been a lot of evidence of a strange overlap between intelligence agencies and music. Exactly why that is it's been curious to me. What was the goal of it all? And it brings me back to something that I learned in that leadership seminar. So in that seminar, I had asked the question. I had asked the question of how exactly one actually goes about changing the direction of a business or a corporation. And what we were discussing was that once a business goes south, it's profoundly difficult to right the ship. It's almost impossible. Once a cynicism and defeatism, pessimism gets into a structure, it's extremely difficult to right that structure, and the larger the structure is, the more difficult it is, right? So I was just asking, okay, it's difficult, but how would one go about it? And she presented some research, and she actually had a book. And by the way, this leadership seminar was great, and the teacher was excellent, and I would officially endorse it right now. But something tells me she might not want to be associated with this odd, strange niche topic, so I'm not going to endorse it on here. But anyway, she was referencing a book that was written by. It was a professor that wrote it. It was an academic work. Anyway, so what they were saying was that in any given organization, and this would apply, the reason why I think this is potentially applicable to McGowan and the entire idea of social engineering and psychological operations on a massive scale, is because what she detailed applies to any set of humans, right? Any broad and a big enough set of humans is going to show this distribution. And the distribution I'm referring to is that, say you have a total pie of people, right? Within that pie, and I can't remember the specific percentages, but what you'll find is that within that pie, you'll have the vast majority of people will be right in the middle. So I think it was like 65 to 75% of people are, I guess, like moderate, like just in the middle. And then on the fringes, you have what can be lumped into as change agents, and then what are lumped into as extremely change-resistant people. Now, the way that would manifest within actual given circumstances would depend on those circumstances and on that structure. But broadly, in terms of personality characteristics, you fall into a small percentage of change agents, small percentage of extremely change-resistant people, and then you've got the masses in the middle, right? And so the system that she discussed in trying to change any organization, business, group of people is that you just want to ignore the change-resistant people. There's too much effort, almost no chance of anything happening. You want to ignore the people, and we don't want to ignore the people in the middle, but you don't want to go right after the people at the middle, because the people in the middle, they're in the middle. They're just kind of like, it's almost like they're trees. I mean, they're just going to go however the flow is going. So the people that you want to target would be the change agents, right? So if you want to go in a certain direction, you would go after those change agents, encourage, coerce, convince, persuade the change agents to go in one direction, and that will take the middle with them, right? And so if you have, say you have this whole thing and you're trying, it's stuck in this position and you're trying to get it to shift right, you would focus on the change agents, get them to shift, which will pull the whole middle. And with that, even the change-resistant people will come. They'll still be change-resistant, right? I mean, we all know people like that would just refuse to go with the times, but even they will have to bend a little bit, because if you don't, then you just get left behind completely. And so, while it would be tricky to identify and isolate those change agents, once you did that, it is actually perfectly conceivable, and with enough resources and enough time, maybe even simple, maybe even easy, to target those change agents, get them in the direction you want them to go in, and then they pull everybody else. Well, if we're looking at the 60 situation, as McGowan put forth, and we're trying to understand, well, where were they going with it, And especially since, people, a certain community of people right now have come to really look negatively upon the whole 60s counterculture, and for understandable reasons, because it undermined the family, undermined basic values, and it could be, I think it can easily be argued that it led us to this disassociation and division and madness that we're living in right now. But I think it's also important to be fair that the stuff that they saw was real. I mean, there was outright overt racism. There were problems in society, and you know what? They helped fix them. And I think any rational assessment and fair assessment of the situation has to credit that. But anyway, so I started trying to understand, what was the purpose of it, though? Like assuming that it was all part of some kind of operation to redirect society. Why? But, well, not why. That's a different question. How did it happen? In what direction? Because right out of the 60s, we went into the 70s, which was marked by absolute hedonism, self-indulgence, drug use, a very unhealthy decade, which then led into the corporate greed and absolute materialism of the 80s, and then the demoralization and demoralization of the 90s. Everybody was always down and depressed, and it's just this whole cycle, right? But the interesting thing is, if you look at it, they appear, and this is assuming that all of those things were orchestrated by some kind of intelligence bodies, and who those bodies would be is a different question. I am not nearly as comfortable as some people seem to be in assessing our own agencies as being thoroughly wicked. Like I'm a veteran, and I love this country, and I'm not at all comfortable with just assuming that that's the truth. But it's a possible truth, right? But anyway, my question now is how? How did it happen? And this is what's fascinating. If you apply that corporate model that I just mentioned, that it appears to be what happened, because the 60s were not... The 60s targeted a specific small group of change agents. I mean, it was all of the people who were... it went after intellectuals and a lot of college students, and just the kinds of people that were willing to throw away their family traditions to put on a backpack and backpack across the country and try all these drugs and do all this stuff, right? We think of the 60s as being this massive cultural change, but it actually wasn't at the time. If you look at the actual number of hippies, it was actually very small. There weren't that many of them in comparison to the whole country. But what it ended up happening is, like, the hippie thing died out, but it didn't go away by any means. It redirected our culture, because those people, even the ones that had to say, okay, well, it's time to get rid of the tie-dye and get rid of my dreadlocks and my beard, it's time to put on a suit and get a real job. Well, they still harbored those ideas and held on to those ideas, and they carried them through. And the long-term effect of what came out of the ideals that were embedded in people in the 60s, the long-term effect redirected society very much in these terms are in a liberal direction. I'm very hesitant to use the word liberal, because the way those words are very oversimplified, but I take it everybody understands what I mean. And so that model, it actually appears that it may have actually been applied, that is what it was. The 60s targeted a very small number of change agent people, which made them, they clashed heavily with those really change resistant people, which were the more traditional, established, conservative mindset. And in the middle was the people in the middle, right? And what happened to the people in the middle, right? You had some people that were like, I'm not really too comfortable with this. I'm gonna, I liked the way that things were. But then you had other people that were like, I don't want to go with that full-blown hippie thing, but let me try that joint that you got there, let's try an open relationship. Like all of these things. They didn't go full on to that full change agent thing, but they started to get pulled along in that direction. And then the net effect over time was that it completely redirected society into one direction. If McGowan's proposal is correct, and the 60s were some kind of social engineering psyop, I think that would be the most rational, likelihood of how it was used. It was not the end goal, right? The end goal was something broader. It was the initial targeting of a certain population of people who were ready and eager for change. You target them, and then they can spin around and influence the rest of the culture to go in a certain direction. I think that's interesting. It's based on corporate research, and if it applies to large corporations, I don't see why it wouldn't apply to a society as a whole. And I find that rather fascinating and rather weird. And I don't know. 2022, I hope you guys are out there crushing your goals and living good lives and living with fascination and wonder at this amazing, strange, bizarre, and sometimes creepy world. Peace out.